My name is Alexa Dixon. I'm 56 years old and a colonel in the United States Army. In all my deployments across the Middle East, I have never seen anything as cold-blooded as the look in my own mother's eyes the moment she slapped me across the face right in the middle of our family dining room. With blood pooling at the corner of my mouth, my father slammed his fist on the table. He roared, demanding I sign over an $11 million inheritance from my grandfather to my 59-year-old brother, a man drowning in debt. They called it family duty. To them, my 31 years of bleeding on the front lines meant absolutely nothing compared to the privilege of simply being born a son. But they didn't know my grandfather left me a secret. Before I tell you how I leveled their delusional empire, drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been bled dry by the very people who share your blood. The fluorescent lights in my office at Fort Belvoir flickered, keeping a harsh rhythm with the relentless vibrating hum of the industrial HVAC system. My desk was a cold slab of government-issue steel buried under 3 inches of classified tactical reports. Thousands of lives rested in those folders. My signature moved troops. It allocated millions in defense funding. Out here, I was the law. Then my cell phone lit up on the metal surface. Susan Dixon, my mother. She never called to shoot the breeze. A ringing phone with her name on the caller ID meant one thing she needed: a problem fixed or a mess cleaned up. I picked it up, pressing the cold glass to my ear. "Your father wants everyone at the ranch this Saturday." Her voice clipped through the tiny speaker. High, tight, and defensive. No, hello, no warmth. "Why?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. "Just be there." The line went dead. Just a hollow electronic click. I pulled the phone away and stared at the black screen. Not a single word asking if the physical therapy on my separated shoulder was working. Not a damn question about the 4-hour drive she was casually demanding I make on my only weekend off in a month. In the Dixon household, I wasn't a 56-year-old woman. I wasn't a senior military officer. I was a utility. A fire extinguisher wrapped in a uniform expected to function the absolute second someone broke the glass. I tossed the phone. It hit the desk with a hard metallic clack. My adjutant peeked his head through the doorway, his eyes darting to the device, then to my face. "Everything okay, Colonel?" he asked, his voice careful. I gave him a single rigid nod. He retreated, closing the door behind him. But beneath my ribs, my stomach pulled into a tight, freezing knot. 31 years in uniform wires your brain a certain way. You learn to smell the bitter tang of cordite before the first shot even cracks the air. My mother's silence wasn't the silence of a busy woman. It was the silence of a woman hiding a loaded gun. That night in my quarters, I packed my go bag. The movements were strictly mechanical, pure muscle memory. OD green shirts rolled tight, boots wiped down. I took my 9mm out of the nightstand, racked the slide out of pure habit, and dropped it into the heavy steel lockbox with a heavy thud. I was supposedly prepping for a quiet weekend at my childhood home, but my hands were moving with the exact same precision they did before a combat drop in Kandahar. The next morning, I hit the highway. 4 solid hours cutting through the dead sun-baked plains of central Texas. Heat waves shimmered violently off the blacktop, warping the horizon into a blurry mirage. I had the AC in my truck blasting on high, blowing freezing dry air straight into my face, but it didn't touch the chill creeping down my spine. My brain started running the data, analyzing the timeline. Grandfather Thomas had been in the ground for exactly 6 weeks. The funeral was a blur of forced, cheap civility. My 59-year-old brother Michael had put on a pathetic show at the gravesite, squeezing out crocodile tears and loudly blowing his nose for the benefit of the neighbors. My father Richard stood beside the dirt pile like a stone wall, heavy breathing, hard eyes. He didn't shed a single tear. Nobody brought up the will. Nobody talked about the estate. 42 days of complete dead air. And now, out of nowhere, a sudden, non-negotiable summons to the ranch. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. I squeezed until my knuckles turned a bruised, ugly shade of white. I knew the unwritten rules of their game. When the Dixons go quiet, somebody is about to get bled. I turned off the main highway, the heavy tires of my truck chewing up the familiar gravel of the driveway. The heavy twisted branches of ancient live oaks cast long jagged shadows across the dirt lot. I slowed the truck to a crawl. My eyes automatically shifted, scanning the perimeter like I was clearing a hostile compound in enemy territory. Right up front, parked diagonally across the overgrown grass like he owned, the damn place was Michael's truck. A brand new, fully loaded Ford F-150. Chrome rims catching the heavy, suffocating afternoon sun. A shiny $80,000 toy for a grown man who couldn't even balance a basic checkbook. Next to it sat my father's dark SUV parked perfectly straight. I started to pull into my usual spot near the rusted barn doors. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the heavy shade, deliberately parked in the blind spot right behind the old tool shed. A black sedan, spotless paint, tinted windows. I read the plates, city tags. Nobody in our county drove a car like that. That was downtown money. That was a lawyer's car. I killed the engine. The cab of my truck went completely silent, save for the ticking of the cooling metal under the hood. Outside, a solitary cicada started buzzing a high grating pitch in the heat. My jaw clamped down so hard a sharp ache shot up into my temples. They didn't call me out here for a family dinner. I was walking into a calculated, well-rehearsed ambush. This was a flanking maneuver, and I was the target. My boots crunched over the dry gravel, stopping just short of the thick oak front door of the Dixon Ranch. The Texas afternoon sun beat down on the back of my neck, heavy and suffocating. My hand hovered inches from the dull brass doorknob. The metal was already baking, radiating a slow heat. Before my skin even touched it, the old programming kicked in. Like a broken reel of film, the unspoken rules of this house played out behind my eyes. They nailed those rules into the floorboards before I could even walk. Michael was the strategic asset. I was the patch job. The backup generator kept in the dark until the power went out. If Michael flunked a basic math test, my father drove down to the school, slammed his fist on the principal's desk, and blamed the teacher for a flawed curriculum. If I brought home a B+ on a final exam, he interrogated me at the kitchen table, like I was a hostile combatant withholding state secrets. His voice would drop to a low, terrifying rumble, picking apart my work ethic. I learned early how to be a ghost in my own home. I learned how to hold my breath, flatten my spine against the hallway walls, and leave all the oxygen in the room for the son who demanded every single drop of it. A sudden breeze kicked up the dust, and for a second the phantom smell of burnt motor oil hit my nose. It was not really there. It was a ghost scent bleeding out of a 39-year-old memory. I was 17. Michael came home blind drunk, missed the driveway entirely, and wrapped my father's heavy-duty pickup truck around a wooden telephone pole. He walked away without a single scratch. My father did not call the local police. He did not take away the keys. Instead, he drove me down to a greasy, failing auto shop on the industrial edge of town and volunteered my summer away. 3 solid months in the suffocating heat of a tin roof garage. No air conditioning. Just a rattling, grease-caked box fan pushing hot dirt around the concrete floor. I crawled under rusted chassis, inhaling heavy exhaust and swallowing grit. I scraped the skin off my knuckles using cheap wrenches, tightening bolts until my hands bled. I paid off the damage my brother caused with my own sweat and blood. And Michael. My father bought him a custom $300 fiberglass fishing rod. They spent that entire July out on the lake drinking cold beers in the boat and casting lines into the deep water. In this family, grace and forgiveness were strictly reserved for the son. Hard manual labor was the daughter's penance. The brass knob glared back at me. I closed my eyes, taking a slow, measured breath. Another memory slammed into the front of my skull. The hollow, sickening echo of an empty auditorium. The day I graduated top of my officer training class. Valedictorian. I stood on the polished hardwood stage in my dress uniform. My back was straight, my shoulders squared, my shoes shined to a mirror finish. I looked out into the vast sea of metal folding chairs, hundreds of proud parents holding cheap plastic bouquets and snapping photos. My designated section was completely empty. 3 empty chairs staring back at me. No flowers, no handshakes, no slight nod of approval. My father was busy driving Michael 3 states over to catch a Major League Baseball game. That was the exact moment the last string snapped. I threw my hope in the trash right there on that stage. I threw myself into the United States Army. I volunteered for the worst deployments, the ugliest combat zones in the Middle East. I decided I would rather take a bullet from a faceless insurgent in the dirt than swallow one more look of absolute disgust from the people who gave me my last name. The military judged me by the brass on my collar and the raw grit in my gut. My family judged me purely by what was between my legs. You are tired down to the bone. The voice belonged to Grandfather Thomas. It echoed in my ears clear and sharp. Just 3 months ago, he sat right here on this wooden porch, a retired Marine, skin weathered like old leather, eyes like chipped flint. He was the only person in this bloodline who refused to call me Lexi. He refused to treat me like the hired help. He looked right through my uniform, right past the service ribbons, and saw the exhausted 56-year-old woman standing underneath it all. People disappoint you because you keep expecting them to act decent, he rasped, tapping his heavy wooden cane against the floorboards. Stop expecting. If you know exactly what that exhaustion feels like, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that settles in after decades of trying to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment and tell me one word that describes the person in your family who took everything and gave nothing. Subscribe to the channel so we can stand our ground together. You are not alone in this fight. His words settled the storm in my chest. The hesitation evaporated. My hand closed around the hot brass doorknob. I twisted it hard, ready to push my way in. I did not even get the chance. The heavy oak door swung violently inward. Richard Dixon stood dead center in the doorframe, a massive blockade of muscle and bad intentions. He wore a crisp button-down shirt tucked tight into dark denim. His jaw was set like a steel vise. There was no reaching out, no step forward for a hug. No, good to see you, daughter. His eyes locked onto mine, cold, calculating, unforgiving. It was the look of a hunter watching a steel trap snap shut. I stepped past Richard, crossing the threshold of the home I grew up in. The air inside felt immediately heavy, thick with years of unspoken resentments and rigged rules. I walked straight down the hallway toward the formal dining room. It was not set for a family gathering. It was staged, a perfectly engineered tribunal, a firing squad waiting for the target to take her mark. My father took his usual spot at the head of the massive oak table, the undisputed patriarch, the judge, jury, and executioner of the Dixon household. My mother sat immediately to his right, her shoulders hunched. She kept her arms crossed tight over her chest, staring a hole into her own lap. She absolutely refused to look in my direction. Then there was Michael, 59 years old, sitting across from her. He had his ankle casually resting on his knee, leaning his heavy frame back in the antique wooden chair like he had already won the lottery. A smug, greasy little smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. The overpowering chemical reek of his cheap drugstore aftershave completely smothered the smell of the roasted chicken sitting untouched on a platter in the center of the table. At the far end, looking entirely out of place, sat Robert Henderson, the estate attorney. He kept his head down, sliding a stack of legal documents inside a scuffed leather portfolio. "Sit down, Alexa," my father barked. "No. Hello. No, how was the drive?" Not a single word about the grueling physical therapy I was enduring for a shattered shoulder. Just a direct, tactical command. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair at the opposite end of the table. I did not slouch. I did not lean against the backrest. I sat dead center. My spine was perfectly straight, my shoulders squared, my hands folded flat and still on the polished wood. I kept my face blank. I waited. The silence in the room was suffocating. Just the slow, heavy ticking of the antique grandfather clock out in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. Robert cleared his throat. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Right then," he muttered, his voice dry and devoid of any emotion. "The probate process for Mr. Thomas Dixon's estate has officially concluded. All outstanding debts and final medical expenses have been cleared. The total remaining liquid assets amount to exactly $11 million. $11 million. I kept my expression carved from stone, but my eyes tracked the room like a sniper scoping a tree line. I watched their micro-expressions. My mother did not blink. She just kept staring at the fabric of her slacks. Michael stopped tapping his foot. His fingers lightly rubbed his jaw, and that smug, entitled smirk widened just a fraction of an inch. My father simply drummed his thick index finger against the oak table. Thump, thump, thump. Nobody gasped. Nobody acted surprised. The realization hit the back of my throat like a hot swallow of battery acid. They already knew. They had known this exact number for weeks. They had been circling this massive pile of cash like buzzards over roadkill. I was the only person sitting at this table who had been blindfolded. A cold, hard disgust settled deep into my gut. I did not move a single muscle. I just let the silence stretch. Robert turned a crisp white page in his portfolio. He did not look at my father. He did not look at Michael. His eyes bypassed the entire family and locked directly onto mine. According to the final stipulations of the trust, Robert read, his voice cutting clean through the heavy air. The sole beneficiary of the entirety of the estate is Alexa Dixon. Clinical death hit the dining room. The grandfather clock kept ticking. Tick, tick. I sat perfectly still. My breathing did not change. My pulse did not spike. Grandfather left everything to me. The throwaway child. The invisible backup plan. I processed the raw intel in real time. Across the table, Michael's smug little smile vanished instantly. His foot hit the hardwood floor with a loud thud. He leaned his bulky frame forward, his elbows digging aggressively into the wood, his face turning a blotchy, ugly shade of red. My mother physically flinched, turning her head away toward the kitchen door to hide her face. My brain snapped the final puzzle pieces together. Me inheriting the money was absolutely not breaking news to them. They already knew the old man left them out in the cold. They knew the money was legally mine. That was the exact reason I was sitting here. My presence was a tactical problem they fully intended to neutralize. My father exhaled, a loud, frustrated burst of air through his nose like he was dealing with a stubborn, irritating animal. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of stark white paper. He slapped his heavy hand over it and shoved it hard down the length of the table. The sound of that paper scraping across the varnished oak was sickening. It slid directly to a stop right in front of my folded hands. I looked down. It was a standard legal waiver, a complete transfer of assets. "Sign it," my father ordered. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble, the exact same voice he used to terrorize me when I was a teenager. The voice that used to make me shrink into the walls. I didn't move a millimeter. "Sign the damn paper, Alexa. Transfer that money over to your brother." Direct, ruthless, absolutely zero hesitation. He did not ask for a favor. He did not offer a single explanation. He did not beg. He issued a command. To him, my legal rights, my future, and the explicit dying wish of his own father were nothing but trash. Obstacles to be quickly swept out of the way for the sake of his golden boy. 31 years of spilling my own blood in military service, and he still looked at me like a disobedient little girl holding a toy that rightfully belonged to a man. I stared at the white paper, the black ink, the little dotted line at the bottom waiting to steal my future. My blood turned to absolute ice water. I slowly lifted my chin. I leveled my eyes, locking my gaze dead onto my father's flushed face. I did not raise my voice. I did not blink. "Dad, did I hear you right?" My father leaned forward. The heavy oak table groaned under his thick forearms. The muscle in his jaw jumped tight and rigid. "You heard what I said," he growled. His voice dropped into that familiar, dangerous register. "Your brother has a wife. He has a mortgage. He needs this money more than you do." My mother shifted in her chair. She finally looked up from her lap. She leaned across the table, clasping her hands together in a pathetic display of fake sympathy. "Lexi, please," she said. Her voice was high, thin, and dripping with manipulation. "You do not need a sum that large. You have your military pension. You have always been so independent. You can take care of yourself." I did not blink. I locked my eyes directly onto hers. There it was, the absolute sickest logic in the world, the ultimate punishment for competence, because I woke up at dawn, because I maintained discipline, because I bled in foreign deserts and built a life entirely on my own 2 feet without ever asking them for a single dime. Because of all that I deserved to be stripped of my legal inheritance. I was capable, so I must be penalized. Meanwhile, Michael sat across from me, a 59-year-old man who lived his entire life like a bloated tick feeding off a dog, a parasite. Yet in their twisted reality, his endless failures made him the most deserving person in the room. He was incompetent, so he must be rewarded. His business is going through a rough patch, my father added, trying to soften the aggressive demand with a flimsy excuse. I cut him off. My voice was perfectly flat, a sheet of ice. And whose fault is that? Did someone hold a gun to his head and force him to run his company into the dirt? The dining room dropped 10 degrees. The air turned solid. "Watch your mouth," my father roared. His face flushed a dark, angry purple. He slammed his open palm onto the table. The silverware rattled against the porcelain plates. I kept my spine pressed straight against the back of the chair. My hands remained folded. 31 years of military service teaches you perspective. When you have commanded troops through incoming mortar fire in Kandahar, when you have felt the earth violently shake from an improvised explosive device, the shouting of an old man in a Texas dining room means absolutely nothing. It is just empty noise. I spent 3 decades missing every holiday, I said. My words were slow, deliberate, heavy. I missed birthdays. I missed Thanksgivings. I stood out in the freezing rain and the scorching heat doing my job. Not once in all those years did a single person in this house ever stop to ask what I actually wanted. Silence hung in the room. A thick, suffocating silence. Michael leaned forward. His boots scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. His smug smile was completely gone, replaced by a defensive, cowardly snarl. "This is family business, Alexa. Do not make it personal." A short, sharp laugh escaped my throat. It was completely devoid of humor. It was a razor blade disguised as a sound. The word family in this house only includes you, Michael. It never included me. My father stood up. The massive wooden chair screeched loudly backward. "You are living a selfish life," he bellowed. Spittle flew from his lips. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You signed that paper right now." I looked at the white sheet of paper. I looked at the black pen resting next to it. Then I looked up. I stared dead into my father's furious eyes. I opened my mouth and released the single word that was strictly forbidden in the Dixon household. "No." The room turned to stone. "I will not sign anything." I just detonated the bomb. My mother snapped. She lunged upward. The heavy wooden legs of her chair shrieked violently against the floorboards. She crossed the short distance between us in a fraction of a second. The slap came down. Fast. Hard. Her open palm struck the side of my face with a sharp, deafening crack. The sheer force of the impact snapped my head to the side. A sharp, stinging heat immediately flooded my left cheek. My teeth clamped down hard, biting into the soft tissue of my inner cheek. The warm, metallic taste of blood instantly pooled at the corner of my mouth. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I did not flinch. I slowly turned my head back to the center. My mother stood towering over me. Her chest heaved up and down. Her hand remained suspended in the air, trembling violently. She pointed a shaking finger directly between my eyes. "You have no choice," she screamed. Her voice was shrill, completely unhinged. I stared back at her. I did not blink. The physical blow did not hurt me. Instead, it was a profound relief. That sharp crack of skin on skin acted like a heavy pair of bolt cutters. It severed the very last rusted chain that bound me to this toxic bloodline. The illusion of a mother was entirely gone. All that remained was a desperate thief. At the far end of the table, a completely different sound broke the tension. Tap, tap, tap. Robert Henderson, the estate attorney, slowly raised his head. He had been looking down at his legal pad the entire time. He tapped the heavy brass end of his pen against the oak wood. The methodical, unbothered sound commanded the entire room. He pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose and looked directly at the woman who just assaulted me. "Mrs. Dixon?" Robert asked. His voice was calm, clinical, and completely immune to their emotional chaos. Are you quite sure about that? My mother held her trembling hand suspended in the air. The physical threat hung between us, but the strike never landed. The sharp, unbothered tap of the brass pen broke her momentum. The heavy silence in the room stretched out thick with the smell of cheap aftershave and cold roasted chicken. My father whipped his head around. He glared down the length of the heavy oak table. The veins in his thick neck bulged against the stiff collar of his shirt. "What the hell do you mean, Robert?" my father demanded. His voice was a low, threatening growl. He leaned forward, attempting to intimidate the lawyer with sheer physical presence. Robert Henderson did not flinch. He did not cower. The estate attorney calmly took off his wire-rimmed glasses and folded the arms flat against the table. He looked directly at my father. The temperature in the dining room dropped to absolute zero. "I mean, Richard, that you and your wife should tread very carefully before you announce that Colonel Dixon has no choice," Robert said. His delivery was surgical, cold, exact. Colonel Dixon, not Lexi, not the daughter they could push into a dark corner and scream at until she submitted, not the utility they could use to clean up their messes. The attorney just dropped my rank right into the center of their rigged tribunal. The entire dynamic of the room shifted in a fraction of a second. The illusion of parental authority fractured. My mother slowly lowered her hand. She took a step back, her eyes darting nervously toward my face. Robert reached into his scuffed leather portfolio. He bypassed the standard legal documents and pulled out a single sealed envelope. It was thick cream parchment, yellowing slightly at the edges. He placed it flat on the polished wood and slid it across the table toward me. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Bold, slanted, pressing so hard into the paper, it left deep ridges on the surface. Grandfather Thomas, a man who survived the Pacific Theater and never tolerated a liar. Across the front, the black ink read, "Only open if they demand the money." A contingency protocol. Robert stated, his voice completely void of emotion. A backup letter, drafted for a specific situation that my client fully predicted before his passing. He gave strict instructions regarding its delivery. I picked up the envelope. The paper felt heavy in my hands, carrying the faint, dry scent of old dust and pipe tobacco. I slid my thumb under the glued flap. The harsh, loud tear of the thick paper ripped through the suffocating silence of the room. Every pair of eyes watched my hands. They were waiting for a bomb to go off. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. I unfolded it, keeping my spine perfectly straight against the wooden chair. I did not look at my family. I looked at the words left behind by a retired Marine who saw through all their cheap illusions. I started to read. My voice was loud, clear, and steady. I did not rush. I let every single syllable land like a heavy hammer on the oak table. "Alexa, if you are reading this letter right now, it means Richard and Michael have already tried to strip you of this money." My father stopped breathing. His jaw dropped a fraction of an inch. His face twisted into a mask of pure shock, the dark red flush draining instantly from his cheeks. Beside him, my mother physically shrank. She took another step back and slumped heavily into her dining chair. All the air left her lungs in a hollow, defeated wheeze. Grandfather Thomas had looked right through their trap while he was still breathing. He saw the ambush coming from 6 feet under the dirt. He knew exactly what kind of cowards his son and grandson truly were. I kept my eyes on the page. I drove the knife deeper into their chests. Your father spent 30 years shielding Michael from the harsh consequences of his own actions. I read, letting the brutal truth echo off the dining room walls. Your mother spent 30 years shielding your father from the guilt of his endless failures. Nobody could save the boy. And nobody bothered to save you. I paused. I lifted my head and looked directly across the table. Michael was no longer sitting back in his chair. The smug, arrogant smirk was completely wiped from his face. A thick layer of cold sweat beaded across his forehead, shining under the chandelier. He swallowed hard. His throat tightened. His hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the table. "Stop reading!" my father hissed through his clenched teeth. His hands gripped the edge of the oak table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He looked like a man watching his house burn down to the foundation. "No," I replied. I locked my eyes onto his pale face. "I will read exactly what he wrote. I looked back down at the heavy ink. Everyone in that house always expects Alexa to understand. They expect you to carry the burden quietly so they do not have to look in the mirror. Remember this: compassion is not a surrender of your rights. You owe them absolutely nothing. The silence that followed was heavy and toxic. The grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. Tick, tick, tick. The absolute truth stripped away their entire defense mechanism. They could not blame me for being selfish. They could not hide behind the false shield of family duty. The patriarch of their own bloodline just handed down a guilty verdict from beyond the grave. I looked at the final paragraph. It was just 2 sentences. You will soon learn the truth about the financial reality of your brother. Do not give him a single dime. Absolute panic flooded the room. The air turned thin and frantic. Michael jolted forward. His heavy boots kicked the wooden leg of the table. That is crazy, he stammered. His voice cracked high and defensive. He wiped his sweaty forehead with the back of his shaking hand. There is nothing to worry about, Dad. He was old. He was just paranoid. He did not know what he was talking about. My father slowly turned his heavy head. He looked past Michael. He looked down the length of the table toward the attorney. The absolute dread in my father's eyes was unmistakable. The illusion of his perfect, successful son was cracking wide open right in front of his face. What finances? My father demanded. His voice sounded hollow, stripped of all its previous roaring thunder. Robert Henderson did not say a word at first. He reached deep into the bottom of his leather portfolio. He grasped a thick, heavy stack of paper and pulled it out into the harsh light of the dining room. It was a massive pile of financial records, bank statements, court filings, foreclosure notices. Every single page was stamped with glaring blood-red ink. Robert placed the heavy stack onto the oak table with a loud final thud. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. These finances, sir. That is private information. Michael lunged across the table. The heavy legs of his antique chair shrieked against the hardwood floor. He threw his massive frame forward, his thick fingers clawing frantically at the stack of bank papers. Robert Henderson did not flinch. The attorney just planted his forearm down hard, pinning the documents flat against the oak. It stopped being private a long time ago, Michael, Robert said. His voice was a razor blade cutting through a cheap piece of string. Over the last 7 years, you have accumulated a mix of bad business loans, leveraged assets, and personal debt. The total is approximately $4.2 million. $4.2 million. The words dropped into the center of the dining room like a cinder block hitting a glass coffee table. All the air was instantly sucked out of the space. My father swayed. His thick, calloused fingers dug into the edge of the table like he was clinging to the side of a cliff. The angry, dark red flush completely drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly grayish white. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. In addition to that, Robert continued completely merciless. He peeled back the top sheet, revealing the glaring red ink stamped across the second page. There are 3 pending lawsuits from creditors currently waiting on a court date, and a final notice of foreclosure on his primary residence. Foreclosure. It is the dirtiest word in the American middle class. It means the bank is coming for the locks. It means you are not just broke, you are radioactive. My father slowly turned his heavy head. He looked at Michael. He did not look at him like a son. He looked at him like he was staring at a mutated rat that had just crawled up through the floorboards. It is complicated, Dad, Michael stammered. He wiped a thick layer of greasy sweat off his forehead with the back of his trembling hand. He looked pathetic. A 59-year-old man driving a brand-new $80,000 Ford F-150 that he did not actually own, living in a suburban house the bank was actively taking away. "Why didn't you say anything?" my mother gasped. Her voice was thin, fragile, and terrified. She clutched the fabric of her blouse, staring at her golden boy like she did not recognize him. Michael let out a dry, manic bark of a laugh. It sounded like tearing metal. Because every time I tried to fix it, the hole just got deeper. I just needed a little more capital to turn it around. A financial disaster is never complicated. It is just ignored until it finally detonates. I sat perfectly still. My spine remained pressed flat against the back of my chair. My hands stayed folded on the table. I did not smile. I did not feel a single ounce of petty victory. All I felt was a cold, thick, heavy disgust. I watched my father collapse. The loud, imposing patriarch, the man who, just 5 minutes ago, roared at me to surrender my legal inheritance, fell back into his seat. He looked ancient, hollowed out, the heavy monument of his ego. A monument he built by constantly crushing me into the dirt to elevate his son, just shattered into a million worthless pieces right in front of his eyes. He bet his entire legacy on a losing horse. If I had backed down today, if I had let that violent slap break my discipline, if I had picked up that black pen and signed my name on that white waiver, Grandfather Thomas's $11 million would have been thrown straight into a massive trash fire. It would have been burned to ash in a matter of months, just to pay off the reckless gambling and gross incompetence of a parasite. My 31 years of bleeding in foreign dirt would have funded his next shiny pickup truck. Robert gathered the stack of red-stamped foreclosure notices. He tapped the edges on the table, squaring them up neatly, and shoved them to the side. They were irrelevant now, just a paper trail of a dead man walking. The inheritance money is not the only thing, mister. Thomas left behind to expose the lies in this house. Robert said quietly, "If you have ever watched the golden child of your family finally get exposed for exactly who they are, hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below with the word parasite if you know exactly what it feels like to watch someone else destroy everything while you are forced to carry the weight. Subscribe to the channel to hear exactly how I finished this fight." Robert reached deep into the dark bottom of his leather portfolio. He did not pull out another legal contract. He did not pull out a bank statement. He pulled out a heavy-duty manila folder bound in thick canvas tape. Government issue. Right across the front cover, a bold black stamp was stamped into the cardboard, classified. He placed it gently on the table. He did not look at my father. He did not look at Michael, who was still hyperventilating in his chair. Robert looked dead at me. "The most important thing here," Robert said, his voice dropping to a steady, commanding rumble, "is that Mr. Thomas wanted to deliver justice to someone who never received a damn ounce of recognition." Robert Henderson's hands moved over the heavy-duty manila folder. Thick olive-drab canvas tape reinforced the spine. The sharp, loud, metallic clack of the heavy steel rings snapping open inside echoed through the silent dining room. He did not look at his notes. He looked straight at my parents. "Mr. Dixon, Mrs. Dixon." Robert said, his voice carrying the cold weight of a judge reading a sentence. "Thomas tracked Alexa's career for 2 solid decades. He kept records. He filed the paperwork. He knew absolutely everything about the daughter you both actively ignored." Robert flipped a thick, laminated page over. A high-quality color copy of a military certificate caught the light from the overhead chandelier. The cold bronze and gold seal gleamed against the stark white paper. "Did either of you even know your daughter was awarded the Legion of Merit, dead air? Heavy, suffocating dead air." Richard blinked. Once, twice. Stupid, slow, uncomprehending blinks. The deep wrinkles around his eyes tightened, but there was zero recognition in his stare. Susan just sat there with her mouth hanging open a fraction of an inch. Total willful ignorance. They did not even know what the medal meant. They did not know it was one of the highest military honors given for exceptionally meritorious conduct in the performance of outstanding services. To them, the United States Army was just a convenient rug they swept their unwanted daughter under. Out of sight, out of mind, out of the way. Robert kept going. He offered no mercy. "A Bronze Star." The lawyer's voice boomed, rattling the fine china in the corner cabinet. She commanded 1,200 troops during a massive, highly classified personnel extraction under heavy hostile fire in Kandahar. The name of the city hung in the room. Kandahar, blood, sand, mortar fire, improvised explosive devices ripping through armored transports. Susan physically shrank back into her chair. Her hands began to shake violently, her fingers trembling against the fabric of her slacks. The blood completely drained from her face. "Lexi," she whispered. Her voice was thin, breaking over the syllables. I did not know." I cut her off. My voice was jagged glass. Because you never bothered to ask. She flinched like I had struck her. You never once called to ask if I was safe. I said, my words coming out flat and mechanical, devoid of any daughterly affection. You only called my phone to demand how much of my hazard pay I could wire home to cover Michael's overdue rent. You called to complain about the landscaping at the ranch while I was washing the blood of my own soldiers off my boots. 31 years. The woman who birthed me knew exactly how Michael liked his ribeye steaks cooked on the backyard grill. She knew his exact shirt size. She knew his favorite brand of cheap beer. But she had absolutely no idea her daughter was making life-or-death tactical calls in a combat zone. She was entirely blind to my survival, but laser-focused on my bank account. Bang! A heavy fist slammed into the oak table. Michael. He jolted upright in his chair. His face was a violent, blotchy shade of red. The thick veins in his neck looked ready to burst through his skin. So what? He spat a fine mist of saliva hitting the polished wood. So what if she got some medals pinned to her chest? What the hell does that have to do with the estate? You think you are better than us. You think a fancy piece of paper makes you a saint. He was drowning. He was a 59-year-old man thrashing around in the deep end of his own manufactured disaster, desperately trying to drag anyone he could down into the mud with him. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell back. I locked my eyes directly onto his panicked, sweaty face. I looked at him the way I would look at a rusted, useless piece of scrap metal blocking a supply route. No, Michael, I replied. I dropped each word like a heavy cinder block. I just think grandfather was smart enough to hand $11 million to a battlefield commander instead of throwing it down a black hole to fund a parasite. Michael's mouth snapped shut. His chest heaved, but he had zero ammunition left. At the head of the table, Richard visibly deflated. His broad, imposing shoulders caved inward. The fight completely left his body. His breathing grew shallow and ragged. It was the heavy, labored breathing of absolute shame. Robert looked down at the final page inside the classified binder. Mr. Thomas left one final directive regarding his decision, Robert said. He read the last written words of a dead Marine. Richard believes Michael needs protection. The truth is, Michael needs severe consequences. You all believe Alexa needs your permission to exist. The truth is, she never needed your approval. Robert closed the heavy canvas binder. Thud. It sounded exactly like a coffin lid dropping shut. I placed both of my hands flat on the edge of the solid oak table. I pushed my chair back. The heavy wooden legs scraped loud and harsh against the floorboards. I slowly stood up. My spine locked perfectly straight, my shoulders squared. I stood at my full height. The dining room chandelier caught my back, casting a long, heavy, suffocating shadow directly down the center of the table. The shadow crawled across the porcelain plates. It crawled over the white transfer waiver. It swallowed my father, my mother, and the 59-year-old child sitting right next to them. The ambush was over. It was time to execute the final order. I looked down at the three people sitting around the oak table. My shadow fell heavy and dark across their faces. 56 years of being told to step back. 56 years of being ordered to shrink myself down so I would not cast a shadow over my brother. I did not feel angry anymore. The heat was entirely gone. What replaced it was a cold, absolute clarity. My eyes swept from Michael's sweaty, terrified face to my mother's trembling hands and finally settled on my father. He looked like an empty, deflated shell of the tyrant he used to be. For 56 years, I began my voice perfectly level, carrying through the thick silence of the room. I was the emergency backup plan for this family. I was the fixer. I was the sacrifice. I was the emotional dumping ground for every single one of your bad days. Nobody dared to interrupt. Nobody opened their mouth to argue. For the very first time in my entire life, they had absolutely no choice but to sit there, shut up, and listen. I was the one expected to drop everything. I was the one expected to bleed. But the absolute truth, I let the sentence hang for a fraction of a second. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I wanted it to crush them. I was never your first choice, not once. The air in the dining room turned heavy, thick with decades of delayed guilt. My mother broke first. She pressed both hands flat against her face. Muffled, ragged sobbing leaked through her fingers. Her shoulders shook violently. "Lexi, please." She choked out the tears soaking into the collar of her blouse. I really thought we treated you equally." Equally. It is the sickest, most destructive lie a parent can tell. The ultimate gaslighting. They call it equal when they deliberately break one child's legs just to build crutches for the other. They call it equal when they ignore your survival to fund a parasite's luxury. I did not soften. I did not reach out to comfort her. I gave a single slow shake of my head. "No, Mom," I said, my voice completely stripped of empathy. "You spent your entire life protecting him." I pointed a rigid finger at my father. He spent his entire life protecting Michael, and I was left to protect myself. Richard Dixon collapsed back into his heavy oak chair. The wood groaned loudly under his weight. His face was deeply lined, suddenly showing every single one of his 80 years. The deep grooves around his mouth pulled down into a mask of pure, unavoidable humiliation. He stared blankly at the cold roast chicken in the center of the table. "Maybe," my father whispered. The word barely made it past his lips. His voice cracked dry and broken. "Maybe I made a mistake." A historical confession. 3 decades too late. "Dad! Do not say that!" Michael shrieked. Pure, unadulterated panic ripped through his voice. He lunged across the table, grabbing the fabric of my father's sleeve like a drowning rat clinging to a piece of driftwood. "Do not give up. We can fix this." My father did not even look at him. He slowly raised his heavy, calloused hand and pushed Michael's desperate fingers away. Richard slowly raised his head. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot and completely hollowed out. "I convinced myself you did not need any help, Alexa." He rasped his chest, hitching with a dry, painful breath. "I told myself you were strong enough on your own. I am sorry." I stared down at him. I saw the absolute regret tearing him apart from the inside, but it meant absolutely nothing. An apology cannot retroactively build a childhood. An apology cannot unbreak a teenager's bleeding knuckles on a greasy garage floor. An apology cannot fill the 3 empty chairs at a graduation ceremony. His regret was utterly worthless. It was expired currency. Michael let go of my father's arm. He turned to me. His face was a sickly, chalky white. The deep red flush was completely gone, replaced by the sheer terror of a man staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. He grabbed the front of his own shirt, his knuckles turning white. "So, what happens now?" Michael stammered. His voice shook uncontrollably. He was practically begging. The arrogant, entitled 59-year-old man in the shiny new pickup truck was gone. All that was left was a pathetic, terrified child. "I am in massive trouble, Alexa. The bank is going to take the house. My wife, she's going to leave me. I do not know how to pay this off." He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for his emergency backup plan to kick in. Waiting for the fixer to fix it. At the end of the table, Robert Henderson calmly closed the heavy canvas military binder. He snapped the metal rings shut. He pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose and looked at Michael. "The inheritance remains entirely the property of Colonel Alexa Dixon," Robert stated. "Clean, factual, non-negotiable." I looked down at the table. Sitting right on the edge of the varnished oak just inches from my hand was the stark white transfer waiver, the exact same paper my father had aggressively slapped down and ordered me to sign just 20 minutes ago. The silence in the room was deafening. Every single pair of eyes, my father's, my mother's, Michael's, and the attorney's, locked onto my right hand. I slowly reached down. My fingers brushed the smooth surface of the oak wood. I picked up the white paper. I stood there in the heavy shadow, holding the $11 million waiver up in the dead, quiet air. I held the crisp white transfer waiver in the air. Michael's eyes tracked it like a starving dog watching a piece of raw meat swinging on a hook. The deep, heavy silence in the room stretched out tight as a piano wire. "I am never going to sign this paper," I said. My voice was flat. I gripped the top edge of the heavy cardstock with both hands. I pulled my hands apart in one quick, violent motion. "Ripe!" The harsh tearing sound of thick paper snapping in half ripped through the dining room. I stacked the two halves together, gripped the edge again, and tore them cleanly down the middle. I dropped the 4 shredded pieces onto the varnished oak table. They scattered across the wood like dead leaves. Michael's face completely collapsed. The final desperate shred of his false confidence evaporated. He let out a hollow, defeated sound, something between a sob and a dry heave, and buried his face deep into his thick, sweaty hands. He slumped forward, his heavy elbows resting on the table, completely broken. The final safety net of the Dixon family was officially cut. And Michael, I added, looking down at his shaking shoulders, I am not going to spend the rest of my life fighting you in probate court for this rundown ranch. I am done. I do not want it. My father slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gray and exhausted. He looked at the shredded pieces of the waiver, then looked up at me. So what are you going to do with all that money? Richard rasped. His voice was completely stripped of its usual commanding thunder. He sounded small, old, defeated. I did not answer him immediately. I turned my head and looked directly at the estate attorney. Robert Henderson was already looking back at me, his pen hovering over his yellow legal pad. Robert, I said, my tone shifting into a sharp professional gear. I want to establish a blind trust. I am putting the entire $11 million into a heavily protected endowment. Robert pushed his wire-rimmed glasses up the bridge of his nose. He did not speak, but the very faint, unmistakable ghost of a smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He nodded slowly, picking up his pen. I want it set up as a full-ride scholarship foundation. I instructed, laying out the parameters with military precision. Strictly for the dependents of combat-wounded veterans and Gold Star families. And I want the trust legally named after Grandfather Thomas. My father just stared at me. He could not process it. In his world, money was a weapon. It was leverage. It was something you used to control the people around you. The idea that I was taking $11 million and giving it all away, completely locking it out of my own bank account, broke his entire understanding of how power worked. But I knew exactly what I was doing. If I put that cash into my own personal accounts, this family would hunt me down for the rest of my natural life. They would show up at my front door. They would call my commanding officers. They would drag me into frivolous civil lawsuits just to bleed me out in legal fees. The money was a tether, a heavy rusted anchor designed to keep me tied to their sinking ship. By dumping every single penny into an ironclad trust fund, I made the money completely untouchable. It belonged to the federal government's tax shelter now. It belonged to kids who actually needed it to pay for college. The parasites sitting at this oak table could not legally touch a single dime. The money was gone, and so was my obligation. A sharp scrape of wood violently broke the silence. Susan pushed her chair back. She stood up, her legs unsteady, wobbling slightly as she rounded the corner of the heavy table. Her face was streaked with running mascara. She reached her hand out, her fingers, trembling desperately, trying to grab my forearm. Lexi, please. She choked out, tears spilling over her cheeks. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything. I took one step back, a clean, deliberate step. Her hand grabbed nothing but empty air. I know, I said. 2 flat, hollow words. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, blank void. Her apology did not come from a sudden, miraculous realization of her toxic behavior. Her apology came from the terrifying realization that her personal goldmine just locked its doors forever. She was not sorry she slapped me. She was sorry she slapped $11 million right off the table. I did not need her fake reconciliation. I just needed the absolute truth exposed. I reached down and grabbed my truck keys off the oak table. The heavy brass keyring jingled sharply in the quiet room. I reached for the front of my jacket. I systematically pushed each button through its hole. 1, 2, 3. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not deliver a dramatic screaming monologue about my victory. I just executed my final orders and prepared to extract. Good luck with the debt, Michael, I said, quietly adjusting my collar. I looked over at my father, who was staring blankly at the shredded paper. Good luck holding on to the empire, Dad. I turned my back. I walked out of the formal dining room. My heavy boots hit the hardwood floor with a steady, rhythmic thud. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not pause in the hallway. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and stepped out into the blinding Texas heat, leaving the ruins of the Dixon family crumbling behind me. The heavy oak front door closed behind me. It did not slam. It just clicked shut with a dull, heavy thud echoing briefly in the dead air. The old, warped floorboards on the front porch groaned and popped under the hard heels of my combat boots. It sounded exactly like the rotting bones of a dead history finally giving out. I stepped off the final wooden step and walked out into the dirt parking lot. The late afternoon Texas heat immediately hit my face like a physical wall. It was suffocating thick with blowing dust, dry grass, and the faint smell of hot asphalt. But for the very first time in my entire 56 years of life, that heavy air felt completely clean. My lungs expanded. I took a deep, deliberate breath. My truck was parked exactly where I left it, sitting in the long shadows of the old oak trees. The metal door handle was baking in the sun, hot enough to burn bare skin. I wrapped my hand around it and pulled it open. The rusted hinges gave a sharp, metallic screech. I climbed up into the driver's seat, the familiar worn leather creaking under my weight. I grabbed the heavy door and slammed it shut, sealing myself inside the cab. I gripped the thick leather steering wheel. I looked up into the rearview mirror. The old wooden ranch house stood completely still in the fading light. From the outside, it looked exactly the same. But inside those walls, the entire foundation was actively collapsing. The commanding patriarch was broken, stripped of all his false authority. The golden child was bleeding out, financially panicking like a cornered rat. The silent enabler was left holding nothing but empty hands and worthless apologies. I did not know what Richard was going to do next. I did not know how Susan would handle the absolute shame of losing her perfect suburban illusion. I did not know how Michael was going to dodge the aggressive collection agencies or how he would explain the impending loss of his massive house to his wife. And I honestly did not care. 31 years of brutal survival in the absolute worst combat zones on this planet taught me a very hard, very unforgiving lesson. You cannot save people who actively refuse to save themselves. You cannot throw a lifeline to a man who is desperately trying to pull you down into the dark water with him. They made their choices. They spent 56 years building a massive monument to their own greed, their own staggering arrogance, and their willful ignorance. Now they get to sit in the suffocating rubble of that monument and choke on the dust. I was officially done playing the janitor. I was done sweeping up their shattered glass and calling it family duty. The cleanup operation was permanently terminated. I reached forward and turned the ignition key. The heavy V8 engine immediately roared to life, shaking the entire steel frame of the truck. The deep guttural rumble vibrated through the floorboards and traveled straight up my legs. I shifted the heavy transmission column into drive. The thick, aggressive treads of my tires crunched over the dry gravel as I pulled out of the dirt lot. I turned the nose of the truck toward the long, empty stretch of the main highway. I hit the automatic switch and rolled the driver's side window all the way down. The hot, rushing wind violently whipped across my face, pulling at my hair and stinging my eyes. For 56 years, I fought a brutal, bloody war on a battlefield that had absolutely no exit strategy. A battlefield called family. It was a war where the rules changed every single day, where loyalty was punished, and where the enemy slept in the bedroom right down the hall. Today, I officially laid down my weapons. I refuse to be their meat shield anymore. I refuse to be their emergency backup generator. I refuse to be the disposable daughter kept in a dark closet until someone needed a problem solved. The $11 million left behind by an old, hardened Marine was never going to pay for a shiny new pickup truck. It was never going to pay off the gambling debts of a 59-year-old child. That money was going to build thousands of new futures. It was going to pay for college degrees and save the kids of soldiers who actually knew the true meaning of blood and sacrifice. Grandfather Thomas would rest easy knowing his legacy was funding warriors, not parasites. I pressed my heavy boot down hard on the gas pedal. The engine screamed as the truck surged forward aggressively, eating up the black asphalt. The sky ahead of me burned a deep, bruised red as the sun finally dragged itself down below the flat Texas horizon. I kept my eyes locked straight ahead on the open road. I did not tap the brakes. I did not look back. If you are listening to this story right now, and you are currently trapped inside a family that treats you like a tool, a bank account, or an emergency backup plan, you need to hear this. Having compassion for absolutely toxic people is a direct betrayal of yourself. Stop setting yourself on fire just to keep them warm. Stand your ground, draw a hard line in the dirt, and drive away. Thank you for listening. Hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell me one thing you had to leave behind to finally find your own peace. Let me know you are out there fighting too.